Florida is weird, and the Space Coast of Florida is really weird. And I can say that because when I wasn't growing up in Bangkok, I was growing up right here. Yes, it's beaches and turtles and surfers, but it's also a spaceport.
Most people are familiar with Kennedy Space Center, less so Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Part wildlife refuge, part spaceport, part military installation. It's the Space Force installation who oversee all the rocket launches on the Eastern Range, including the one we're here for, because we may not get to space in this episode, but it's on our list.
And despite the confusion and the jokes, the Space Force might be the most critical branch of the military yet. They're also the reason you made it to Grandma's for Thanksgiving and avoided that 2-hour delay on the interstate. Whether we take time to look up or not, space is an integral part of the modern world, and nothing goes into space without the Space Force. So we're traveling to Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, the military base that oversees all launches in the Eastern Range. We want to learn about the role Space Force plays on the ground and in the stars, and if we're lucky, maybe see a launch.
The name may be new, but the base is not. The official Space and Missile Museum is on installation and the site of over a half a century of space history. Museum director Jamie Draper took us to some of his favorite sites. Complex 26 was our first stop. This is where America entered the space race with the launch of Explorer 1, our first satellite.
This was essentially command control for launch activity for this dual pad complex. It smells like the 1950s. It has a historic...
The smell of the 50s.
Yeah.
This is the firing room. And this is where it all happened. This is where the launch switches were switched and that rocket went up only 400 feet out that direction. So the walls are 2 feet thick, the ceiling 5 to 8 feet thick. The windows, you're looking at 3 segments of 15 panes of glass.
Right.
And that's for protection of this crew.
This was state of the art at the time.
This was state of the art. You've got some vacuum tube technology in here, some transistorized equipment.
These little...
All the amenities of the time, you have to have a built-in ashtray.
Yeah, this is actually...
Especially for a military facility.
It feels almost like a movie set.
And imagine this space with 50 to 75 personnel. Rocketry is a team effort, always has been. And when they're doing that countdown, you hear fuel, go, launch, go, and if there's any issue, they place a hold. And they do that to this day.
For me, it highlights just this proximity. Shooting off rockets is not without its risks.
So these were built to withstand a direct impact. They don't have warheads, but they're a big cylinder of fuel. It's very explosive. If everything's a go, they flip that switch and that thing.
Can I do it?
Oh, yes.
All right, T-minus 3 seconds and counting. 3, 2, 1, fire.
Oh, man.
That happened right here?
Yes. That happened between the pad and here.
But fortunately, that wasn't manned.
That was not manned, no. Nothing crewed launch here except for a few monkey knots.
Yeah.
So we had some bioflights launch from this complex.
Bioflights?
They were
Like,
successful.
we're monkeys.
And then in this chamber of the blockhouse, we host a Mod 1 Burroughs computer. For this computer, the memory bank, I think, is about 256 bytes. So imagine that in comparison to your device in your pocket. This is literally millions of times more powerful in processing and storage and everything else than this computer. And despite the seemingly antiquated nature of it, this could deliver a warhead to Moscow in a matter of minutes back in 1960.
Wow.
And this facility highlights the history, heritage, and lineage leading up to where we are today.
A short walk from there, Jamie couldn't resist showing us yet another milestone.
This is Launch Complex 5-6. This is where Alan Shepard, the first American into space, launched May 5th, 1961. A few months later, Gus Grissom, one of my astronaut heroes, launched in the same configuration from this spot. They launched in these little Mercury capsules, one-seater astronaut capsules aboard a modified Redstone ballistic missile.
How terrifying must that have been?
Well,
Being
dude,
that little tiny capsule.
we haven't done this before, but I think we're cool.
I think we're gonna be okay.
It was a big risk, yeah. You know he's scared, but that's the definition of bravery. You're scared, you do it anyway. So you're talking Mercury program, they're test pilots. They went through all the rigors, and this is what they lived for. Mercury program was to get man in space. Gemini program came in 65, 66, and that was to get people working in space. And then it all led to Apollo, and Apollo was to get us to the moon. All of this was geared toward getting us to the moon, and it was successful.
So being that very first guy, that
Yeah.
Alan Shepard,
Yeah.
he has got to be incorrigible at a cocktail party.
I'm sure. I've heard some stories, yes, yes.
Next up was Hangar C, where you really get a sense of the depth and scope of the programs developed and launched here, often through unique partnerships between private, military, and civilian contractors and developers, all working together.
This is our indoor rocket garden, basically housing and displaying the crown jewels of our museum operation.
So with fresh eyes coming in here, what would you say the most significant pieces are and why?
It's really hard to...
It's choosing your child.
Yes, exactly. Everything in here is so unique. And almost all of these were tested here on the Cape. So what you see is basically test paint schemes. You know, like this bright red snark behind us. Obviously, that's not an operational test scheme because the enemy would see this big red thing barreling toward them. The bright colors, the checker patterns, those were intentional for our crews on the Cape to see their trajectory, to monitor them, to film them.
Right.
A lot of them blew up, some of them intentionally so, to learn from issues that were arising with the program. And when the school groups come in here, it's amazing. These kids
I
are
bet.
just bouncing all over the place. They're in awe. We want to inspire people not to just learn more about history, but to take this and go into aerospace engineering and become the next, paradigm shifter.
One of the things I love about a museum is within a relatively short amount of time, you can learn the history of things and understand things because it's so visual and everything.
You're out of the classroom, your nose isn't in a book. This is visual learning at its core. That's what drew me in, the tangible connections with the past. And it inspires you.
I mean, yes, there's tour groups that come out here, but there's not that many people that get access to that,
True. Since it's an active military spaceport, there will always be that limitation. So we've got a grand vision for the future, and that will be a large, purpose-built museum facility outside the gate. Right now, we have all of this material inside. That helps extend the life of these pieces by hundreds of years. We get it in a climate-controlled, purpose-built museum environment. You're talking thousands of years, and that's the goal.
That's right. He said thousands of years. And he's not joking. He took us to one of his favorite sites on the Cape to talk about the role conservation and history play in the Cape Canaveral of today. We pulled up to the 1950s era test site for the Navajo cruise missile program.
This structure is so unique, and there's nothing like it in the world. Honestly, a miracle is still here.
Why a miracle?
Yeah.
Well, like many of the sites around here, once the program ended, it was abandoned in place. What you see is what Mother Nature hasn't taken away yet.
The salt era is relentless.
Yes.
You're concrete and metal, everything.
It's honestly one of the most inhospitable preservation environments in the world. You would never guess looking at it, but it's a launch stand.
Wow, this is a view.
Whoa.
One of the best views on the Cape. This is where a lot of the older activity occurred before ICBM Roe and the era of the Atlases and Titans. Navajo was a very unique program, very short-lived, mid-50s. We test launched about 11, none of them fully successful. Very complicated
really?
program.
Really?
It wasn't successful as an operational missile system, but it was highly successful as a research and development program. We have the only one left in existence in the museum collection.
Yeah.
Wow.
Even though it's been around for 50, 60, 70 years or whatever, feels like we're nascent. This 10 years or 20 years from now,
It will change dramatically. Range of the Future is going to potentially transform all of this into a commercial spaceport. So imagine an airport. This would be along those lines, but with rockets.
I would like to think that my kids' will be here, able to come see this someday.
Museum folks, we focus on the now, but also the distant future. So I'm not thinking about my kids and my grandkids. I'm thinking thousands of years into the future. I'm pondering when we're an intergalactic species,
Right.
people flying back to Mother Earth and going to the Kitty Hawk of the space age here at Cape Canaveral and seeing this is where it all started. Space hipsters and the pad rats and the Cape apes and all these great nicknames for people that made it all happen.
And some who respectfully, they gave their lives for it.
Yeah, that's right. There's inherent risk, and that's a big part of the story out here. You need to know where you've been to know where you're going. And for me, it's all about saving those key representative sites.
I know, yeah.
Preservation's key.
That problem of what to save and how to preserve it is even greater due to the explosive growth in the area. Not only are there multiple private operators working on the launch pads these days, think SpaceX and ULA, NASA is working on one of its largest projects to date.
And none of these missions could move an inch without the operational command of Space Force. We caught up with Captain Chang and First Lieutenant Ruckland back on Launch Complex 5-6 to learn more about the role of Space Force. But not before we got a few stories about the Redstone launches.
These the yellow with the sprays nozzles, that's the water suppression system. And a lot of people think that that's like for fire or whatnot, but it's actually for acoustic reasons. Basically, if we didn't spray that water and the sound waves didn't have something hit,
Yeah.
it would just completely destroy the pad.
Wow.
So you used to have an unfortunate NCO pick the short straw, go out there, and no joke, they would literally turn that sucker on, hide behind that thing, go into the tunnel and go back in that building. Now we have all remote automated systems. One of the funniest things to me is that when they fueled this thing, it's literally on a scale. And I'm talking like an actual analog scale. Somebody's in there watching like the old school penny scale turn to the right weight to know that it's fueled.
Well, you guys are both engineers. I think that's what a lot of people don't realize in Space Force. Not everyone's an astronaut, or whatever. Again, as an engineer, what's interesting about being in Space Force?
Man first flew in 1903. Just over 60 years later, we put someone on the moon.
Right.
And so the progression of aerospace technology is leaps and leaps and bounds ahead of almost anything else and how quickly it progresses.
Space Force isn't some brand new thing.
Yeah, our mission set belonged to what used to be U.S. Space Command under the Air Force. And eventually they decided that that mission has become too large for just one command under the purview of another branch. So similar to how the Marines eventually broke away from the Navy, we broke away from the Air Force, but our job existed before and continues to grow and evolve. It is its own domain now.
How do you guys view the role of Space Force overall?
Really, Space Force is integrated with everything because you hear Space Force and you think maybe above the 60-mile height line, but actually it involves entire electromagnetic spectrum. Communications, right? We have communication satellites. Well, every single branch needs communications. Same with GPS. Every single branch uses GPS. So really, our role is probably more integrated than any of the other branches because we have to be.
I can't imagine what it's like in you guys' position. Number one, have to overcome the jokes in the beginning, and to be really probably one of the most serious efforts that we make as a nation.
Once upon a time, space used to be what we call a benign domain, as in it was kind of this shared handshake agreement, we're not gonna touch our stuff, we're not gonna touch your stuff. It's not that way anymore. It's not wrong to say that every single satellite in space experiences some level of attack, whether that be from an adversary or also just from the fact that that satellite is facing, UV radiation, debris in space. Like for instance, we've had recently several ASAT, anti-satellite events where other countries have launched missiles against their own satellites, and then blow them up. If you've seen movies, right, like that debris causes an issue with our satellites. The most recent one forced the ISS to actually move for the safety of the astronauts, right?
We're just sitting here, we're having a casual conversation here on the eastern seaboard and the space coast of Florida. And there seems to be a lot going on up there we have no idea.
Yeah.
The launches that we do here are the most visible thing that the Space Force does, but it is by far not the only thing we do. Our warfighting domain is a digital domain. We are fighting to keep our code that runs all of our satellites up and running. We're fighting to make sure that those satellites stay in place, like you said, from physical attacks, from digital or cyber attacks, and from the hostile environment that is space itself, right? As we send up new satellites, not just warfighting satellites, but scientific satellites, we learn new things all the time. The James Webb Telescope is going to tell us a whole lot more about space and a whole lot more about what it means to put things into orbit around Earth, put things into orbit around other planets, and eventually travel to other planets and other places in the solar system.
Even your most top secret satellite, it comes overhead. All you need is a strong hobby telescope and you can see that thing.
Yeah.
There's nowhere else in the world that it feels so niche and so vulnerable.
There's nowhere to hide.
There's nowhere to hide, exactly. And that's what we're up against. We're up against trying to make sure that those things stay safe. It's one of those things where they say it's doing a really great job when you never hear about it. When you hear about it, you have a terrible day, all right? So give us a little credit. If you haven't heard about it, that means we're doing something right.
Before we headed to our forward observation point for the launch, we met with several Range Operation Commanders, or ROCs, at the Morrell Operations Center, or MOC, to shed a little light on what their role in a launch is. Meet Second Lieutenant Shope Horster, First Lieutenant Conklin, and Second Lieutenant Saw.
Our job here is really public safety. So come day of launch as Range Operations Commanders, we are in charge of the launch from a range perspective. So the customers will come in, they are in charge of their rocket, they worry about their rocket. What we are in charge of here is we worry about the pad itself, and we worry about the land around it. Boats in the area, aircraft in the area, but we also worry about the people.
So on game day, when it's a launch, and you guys are doing this, what are you guys seeing up here on the kind of the big screens?
Here on the big screen, we have a feed from pad itself with the rocket out there, or kind of their graphic user interface, kind of showing the status of everything going on. We also do monitor the weather, as you can see up there in the upper right. But we, in the bottom right, we usually have Twitter feeds, because as you can imagine, service providers are out there blasting things out super fast. So sometimes updates come through that as we're getting them.
So I mean, you're pulling information from kind of everywhere, and then you're assimilating that and making sure that whatever it is, the range is protected or safe. When we talk about the Eastern Range, I don't think most people understand, but what is the Eastern Range?
Well, the Eastern Range itself is right here at Cape Canaveral, so it's right here down south. That's where we do most of our launches from.
And the range, though, extends out, so how far out does the range extend? So it goes all the way to?
Yes, out to Ascension, all the way up to Wallops Island in Virginia. So we have a 15 million square mile.
That's a lot to cover.
I don't think most people realize that there is a role that Space Force has, that really does butt up against not only the public, but these commercial relationships that you guys have as well.
Space is ever growing. Top leadership decided to put more focus into it. Everything that we do in the Space Force was already there in the Navy, in the Air Force, and in the Army as well. So really what we did was we just took it all and put it into one mission. So we have different jobs. We have orbital warfare, which is satellites, command and control, things like that. We have space battle management, looking at our radars, space domain awareness, things like that. And then we also have electronic warfare supporting our other branches as well.
What's the role of Space Force going to be, in the future?
You think about GPS and the overarching effect it has on everything we do, whether it's banking systems, just finding directions to get from here to my parents' house.
I mean, you support commerce kind of in a really big sense.
Everything that you have today, just you're utilizing space, and no one seems to understand the linkage of that too, but.
And now to see the U.S. Space Force in action. We were escorted to the observation point by Media Operations Chief Heather Scott. She gave us a quick rundown on the impending launch.
In the event of any sort of anomaly or any reason that we need to get out of this area safely and quickly, our cars are backed in so that we can egress quickly. But in the event of an emergency today, if we need to shelter in place, that's our vehicles.
And so we saw a little bit of venting, you said?
Sure. SpaceX's teams are going through all of their final checkouts, making sure the vehicle's healthy and ready for flight. From the perspective of our team, the Space Force folks that are in the Operations Center are doing the exact same thing. So they're running through, making sure that weather is still green, that the range, that we don't have any aircraft in the keep-out zones, as well as mariners, so that we don't have a fouled range.
And then when do we start getting excited?
You're not excited already? Well, I love seeing first-timers see their first launch.
Yeah.
Because seeing it through your eyes is that much more exciting, because it doesn't ever get old. I'll watch that, but I'll watch you guys probably too.
So this is a Falcon 9. You'll have the booster. On top of it, you'll have whatever the payload is that they're taking. That'll separate.
Yes.
Hopefully.
We won't see stage separation because it's so clear and sunny today. At night, you can even see where the first and second stage separate. The booster, that first stage burns back and lands on the drone ship or on land, depending. And actually, this one's burning back to a drone ship landing out in the Atlantic.
You've had how many this year so far?
This is 18, maybe?
18?
I have to look it up. But we're tracking 66 potential launches this year.
So 66
That's a lot of launches.
More than one a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So pardon the pun, but there is an acceleration of launches.
Absolutely. Yes, the shuttle program ended in 2011, and people thought that this area just went dormant. The Space Coast is alive and well. Here we go.
Oh, there we go. Oh. Oh,
man. Whoa. Holy cow, that's amazing. Yeah.
Man.
That's incredible. You feel it, man. You feel it. You feel it.
Since they started.
First launch.
For launch.
It's easy to get distracted by what's right in front of us, but sometimes it pays to stop and wonder what's going on up there. We may not understand what they do and why they do it, and there may be those that don't agree with the whole mission of any military branch. But it's clear that Space Force plays a critical role in our daily lives, and the lives of those with the future of our species in mind.
We don't know what benefits will come from space exploration, but we do know that space will ultimately be another place filled with people and their interests. And where there are people, there are opportunities to make things better.